Hello everyone, I'm Brandy and welcome back to True Crime and Felines. Every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my naughty felines today. Are you having a good Christmas? Great! Let's ruin it by talking about a family massacre that happened on Christmas Day in 1929, shall we? This week's case deals with the Lawson family. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. So Charles Lawson was born in 1886 and he was a sharecropper in North Carolina. Sharecropping is where an individual could rent a plot of land from somebody else and grow their crops, and then they give a share of their crops to the landowner as rent. So it was a great way to get started in farming back then without having to own your own land first. Now, Charles would do this most all his life. In 1911, he met his wife, Fanny, and they were married. The couple would end up having 8 children, but unfortunately they had a son, William, who died of pneumonia at 6 years old. So they had 7 children remaining, and those were, in order of age, Marie, Arthur, Carrie, Maybelle, James, Raymond, and their smallest, Mary Lou. So in 1918, Charles ended up following his brothers to Germantown, North Carolina, where they would all work as sharecroppers on a tobacco farm. Eventually, they all would save enough money to buy farms of their own. In 1927, Charles would move his family into a modest farmhouse with a barn and land so they could grow their own tobacco. Now, Charles's brothers would buy plots of land around the farm as well, so he lived close to his 2 brothers, Elijah and Marion, as well. All was fine for a couple of years. In the fall of 1929, Charles suffered a head injury. He was digging a ditch with a pickaxe type tool, and he ended up accidentally hitting himself in the head with it. Ouch. Now, people would say that ever since that injury, he wasn't normal. He was quick to anger, and his temper was more intensified when he got to that anger. He began to behave erratically, according to family and friends, and he did complain to the town doctor that he suffered from headaches and insomnia. But it appears he just dealt with the injury and moved on. Now, a couple weeks before Christmas Day in 1929, Charles would load the family up and drive them to town. He would take them to fancy stores to buy very expensive clothing, and then told the family that they were all going to get their photograph taken. Now, this was very unusual because back in 1929, to commission a photograph of your family was a costly endeavor, and it was usually only reserved for, those wealthy families. The Lawsons barely survived on the money they made tobacco farming, so they had very little money left over for extravagance. When Franny questioned Charles as to why he was doing this, he just simply replied that it was a Christmas surprise. So let's cut to Christmas Day of 1929. Now, normally in North Carolina, it doesn't snow much, but this year was different. An early snow had come in, and it actually had been snowing a lot, making conditions very bitter. So on Christmas Day, there was actually a very deep snowfall. The family awoke as normal and started their day. Marie, the eldest daughter at 17, got up early and decided to make her family a Christmas cake. The 2 middle daughters, Carrie, who was 12, and Maybelle, who was 7, was getting their winter clothes on because they planned to walk up to their aunt and uncle's house just to wish them a Merry Christmas. Fanny, the wife, was attending to Mary Lou, who was 4 months old at the time. And the boys, James, who was 4, and Raymond, who was 2, was just playing in the living room. Arthur, the oldest son at 16, was actually sent to town by Charles to get bullets for their annual rabbit hunt that they did every Christmas. Charles, however, had darker intentions. He headed out to his tobacco barn where he readied his 12-gauge shotgun. As Carrie and Maybelle headed to their aunts and uncle's house, they would pass the tobacco barn. Charles would shoot them both in the back and then drag them into the barn. He would put rocks under their heads and would cross their arms across their chest. Charles then left the barn and headed towards the house. His wife Fanny was standing on the front porch and he shot her in the chest. Marie, who witnessed this, probably screamed, and Charles entered the house and shot Marie. The two little boys, James and Raymond, tried to flee and hide, but the house is only so big, so Charles easily found them and shot them as well. The remaining child in the house was 4-month-old Mary Lou, who was in her crib in the living room. Charles would end up bludgeoning her to death, as during the autopsy they determined that she died of a fractured skull. Charles would end up positioning all the bodies in a similar fashion with their arms across their chest, and he would put pillows underneath their heads. Charles then took his gun and he walked off into the woods with his 2 dogs. Now, obviously there was a lot of gun activity going on, and it actually did not draw attention from any of the neighbors. And this is because on Christmas morning, a lot of families had hunting traditions, so it was very common to hear gunshots going off all day. So nobody thought much about it. It was only when Charles's brother Elijah and his sons, fresh from their hunting trip, was passing by the Lawson farm and thought they would stop and wish the family a Merry Christmas. That's when they discovered this horrible situation. Elijah sent his sons to go get help, and word spread rapidly. Several town folk would flock to the scene. When word reached Arthur, who was in town buying bullets, he was brought home by a neighbor immediately. Now, several hours would pass as authorities on the scene would just try to make sense of what happened here. And the problem is that Charles was still missing. They had no idea where he was at. It was only when the crowd that was at the scene heard a gunshot go off nearby in the woods. Charles's 2 dogs would come running out of the woods and actually lead authorities to Charles. There, they found Charles with a self-inflicted gunshot to the chest. He would use a forked stick to accomplish this. Charles was laying up against a tree, and there were footprints encircling the tree where the snow had been tramped down so much that they speculated that Charles had just been pacing around the tree for hours. They also said that there were spots in the snow where the 2 dogs had actually lain down to watch their master, and that's how they figured that he was pacing for hours. Upon inspecting Charles's body, in his pockets was $60 and 2 half-written notes. They weren't completed. The first note said, "Troubles can cause," and the second note said, "No one to blame but." It didn't really give a lot of insight as to what happened, but the evidence and the authorities determined that Charles did take out his family and then took out himself. So then the task began of, why did Charles do this? I mean, they seemed to be such a happy family, and they had this great photograph that they just took 2 weeks before. So there's 3 different motives that have been coming up over the years. The first one is obviously his head injury. Many said that he wasn't the same afterwards and that his mental state just deteriorated until he snapped. Now, at his autopsy, they did an analysis on Charles's brain. It was noted that his brain was a bit smaller than normal, and in the center of the brain seemed underdeveloped. But as far as any physical issues from his head injury, they just weren't there. The second motive was that Charles witnessed an organized crime, and a bunch of mobsters came out and killed the family and killed Charles, making it look like a murder-suicide to keep them quiet. There was also a story that a couple weeks prior, Charles got into a fight with a black man, and the black man came out and got his revenge. However, the evidence really pointed away from this, so that motive lost some steam. The final motive is what people believe to this day, that Charles forced an incestuous relationship with his daughter Marie, who was 17, and she became pregnant. Charles's niece, Stella Lawson, would state that Fanny found out about the incest and would confide in her family about it and not knowing what to do. Stella stated that Fanny's sister-in-laws, aunts, and even Fanny's own mother knew about this. Stella would overhear them talking about it constantly. Now, this started as early as 1928, a full year before the murders. So was this incest going on since then? Now, this story would be corroborated later by Ella May, who was actually Marie's friend. Ella stated that Marie confided in Ellie Mae, saying that she was pregnant with her father's baby and that her mother Fanny knew about this as well. Marie would continue to tell Ellie Mae that, please don't tell anyone, because Dad said if I told anyone, there would be some killing done. And there is another neighbor named Hill Hampton who claimed to be Charles's best friend. He stated that he knew the family was going through some pretty awful issues, but he didn't want to elaborate because it was too disturbing. It is important to note that the autopsy did not report that Marie was pregnant, and there was no formal document saying Marie was pregnant. However, at the time in 1929, they did the autopsies pretty much the next day. And they may not even been looking for that because that wasn't even thought about. And this motive actually didn't come out until decades later when Stella came forward. So it's possible that they just didn't even look for this during the autopsies. Now, it is speculated, because of this latest motive, that Charles did plan this murder for a while. That he either found out that Marie was pregnant, or he found out that his wife Fanny told her family and a scandal was about to erupt. The photograph was believed to be his last effort to leave an impression of a happy, great family. And it was also that he purposely sent his eldest son Arthur to town to keep alive his legacy or his family name. Now, when Charles took the family to town and bought him clothes and got the photograph done, it cost a lot of money, and there was only $60 left in his bank account after this. He would end up drawing that money out and just completely closing his bank account that day the photograph was taken, and that's the money they found in his pocket. So was all this evidence together his way of trying to leave a legacy of a good family and bury the bad secrets? Now, of course, this story would spread like wildfire. There was word of mouth, of course, but also the newspapers would run with it everywhere. And because of this, the actual Lawson family funeral drew in a crowd of 5,000 people. The caskets were even left open so the viewers could see the bodies. Mary Lou, the 4-month-old, was actually buried in her mother's casket in her arms. They were all buried all next to each other in a giant plot in a cemetery with a huge headstone listing all their names. On the headstone, it actually reads, "Not now, but in the coming years, it will be a better land. We'll read the meaning of our tears, and then sometime we'll understand." Kind of a creepy thing to put on a headstone, knowing now what the possible motive could have been. Now, ironically, The family were all buried in the very clothes Charles bought them for the photograph. So after the funeral and everything, Charles's brother Marion would actually open the house and turn it into a tourist attraction and charge a 25-cent admission fee per person. The house was left in its current state. There was no cleanup or anything, so it was disheveled and bloodstained, and included the pillows that their heads laid on in Mary Lou's crib. The gun used on the family was actually put in display as well. Maria's cake that she baked that morning was left out. Now, as tourists walked through, they started picking raisins out of it for souvenirs, and Marion would end up putting the cake in a display case. So with this part of it, I just want to point out that just in case you think you're not normal for being interested in true crime, just remember that people had a curiosity about this way long before you were born. I've stayed the night at the Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa, and it was a creepy but fun time. Now, I've never actually paid to walk through a quote-unquote fresh crime scene with blood on the walls and nothing cleaned up. I don't even know if I was even offered that choice, if I would... Oh, who am I kidding? I probably would. Just know that if you're interested in true crime, it's a normal thing. So don't let people tell you it's not. Anyway, Marion would defend his decision about opening the house for this tourist attraction because there was still a mortgage on the farm, and he said he wanted to save the farm. It was widely believed that Charles purposely sent Arthur to town because of two reasons. One, he wanted to continue his family name, and he thought Arthur was the best kid to do that. Or two, he was the only person that could actually stop Charles's plan. Arthur was a pretty big boy and could overpower his dad, so if he saw what he was doing, he could have stopped him. Arthur would go on to marry and have 4 children of his own. However, the trauma of what he went through stuck with him all those years, and he drank a lot. Unfortunately, in 1945, at the age of 32, Arthur died in a car crash. Now, this tragedy would be featured in 2 books and 2 documentaries and a few songs. The books are called White Christmas, Bloody Christmas, and The Meaning of Our Tears, which is from the same author. The motive of the incestuous relationship between Charles and Marie are very well documented in The Meaning of Our Tears. The documentary A Christmas Family Tragedy came out in 2006. And in 2018, another documentary called Trouble Will Cause. So I encourage you to check out those 2 documentaries as well. Now, as far as the house, sorry crime tourists, it was tore down a long time ago in the mid-1900s. Some of the wood from the house was actually saved and went on to build a covered bridge in the area. Now, there's no house, but in Madison, North Carolina, there's actually a Lawson family murder museum that you can visit, and it will tell you the whole story, and you can buy souvenirs. Something to put on your true crime travel list. Well, guys, I hope I did not ruin your Christmas too much with this story. What are your thoughts? Do you believe in these motives? Do you believe that it was a cover-up and Charles really didn't do any of it? Please don't forget to subscribe, and I will be back next Friday with my felines. Hopefully they're not so naughty this time, with another true crime case or mystery. Thanks, guys. Bye.